It isn't working. All right. I'm going to start with an administrative matter. I am taking care of my mother who has dementia and she is asleep. She knows I'm doing this, but that doesn't mean anything. So if she wakes up, I'll have to get her settled real fast. But it should only take me a second, just so you know. And hopefully she won't wake up.
Okay.
Um, so just so everybody knows. Well, welcome. I'm grateful you're here. And I'm going to talk about grassroots messaging and the important role they have um, in communicating the message that Democrats are trying to get out. And that why this is such an important role for volunteers. So I want to start with the fact that I am not a communications professional. I'm a lawyer. I'm a legal educator. I've taught trial advocacy. So I have taught people how to persuade others. And I also spend a lot of time doing research on messaging. So the goal for tonight is to clarify the environment that we're in, and then to give all of us some tools that we can use for a steadier, more effective messaging. So these are my terms. They are not something I got off the interweb. These are my definitions. So there are different forms of political communication. There's political commentary and political messaging. And neither are good and neither are bad. They just do very different jobs. And we can get confused and frustrated when we confuse the two different forms. So political commentary helps people interpret and process events that just happened. So it interprets what happens. It reacts very quickly. It can analyze motives and impacts, and it energizes people. But generally speaking, it energizes people that are already paying attention. And here's something very important that political commentary does in Alabama: it builds community among a group of people who are already engaged. So we all know this. We like to follow other blue dots in Alabama. It makes us realize that we're not alone, that there are other blue dots out there. But commentary tends to just circulate in audiences that are already aligned with us. It reinforces, but it generally doesn't expand. Now, political messaging, on the other hand, serves a different function. Political messaging is designed for movement, not necessarily in one post, but over time. It starts with clear values and it tries to lower resistance, not raise the temperature. And hopefully, it is built to travel. It is something somebody can repeat easily. And it's about building credibility over time. So, grassroots volunteer messengers are not replacing political commentary. We're just operating in a different lane. Blunt truth is most political communication only reaches people who are already paying attention and largely aligned with us. Now, let's talk about why we feel like the messaging system is broken right now, because I'm sure all of us do. Nothing we say lands. Conversations quickly escalate into fights. Facts don't shift minds. We can tell the same fact over and over again, and nobody believes us. And outrage dominates. And that frustration is very real. But this is not a failure on our part as messengers. And it isn't because people don't care, because they do. It's because something structurally has changed. News consumption has shifted dramatically. News is now mostly received passively. People are not searching out political news, but they do encounter it incidentally through their social media feeds, their group chats, and what the algorithm exposes them to. So the algorithm exposes them to familiarity over accuracy or value. It doesn't matter if it's familiar, the algorithm is going to give it to you. And again, outrage spreads quickly, but it doesn't build trust and it doesn't reinforce trust that we've already built. So we've got to recognize that the environment has changed, the distribution system has changed, and our trust pathways have changed. Platforms do not show people everything. They prioritize content from people they recognize, people they trust, people they already interact with. And here's something else to think about. What shows up in their feeds doesn't just stay there. It becomes the things they talk about at the dinner table, at the football game, at church socials, in their group texts, in their communities. So, what we are exposed to in our digital lives drives our conversations and what we talk about in our personal lives. So, here's the core idea for tonight. If a message is going to travel beyond the people who already agree with us, it has to move in our existing networks. Grassroots messengers are not better than campaigns or political commentary accounts or even party accounts. We're just visible in places that others simply aren't. And familiar voices feel human, not political. And this is why messaging is volunteer work. Democratic messaging shouldn't primarily be for campaigns and parties, etc. Campaigns broadcast, volunteers circulate. Volunteers already live in other networks. We've already built that trust. We have two things that campaigns and party apparatus don't have. We have proximity and trust with those in our networks. So, before we talk about what grassroots messaging is, let's talk about what it isn't. Because I'm sure when I was talking in the last slide, I'm saying, you need to be talking in your own networks. You're thinking, oh crap, she wants me to argue with Uncle Bob on Truth Social. It's like, no, it is not arguing with strangers or with Uncle Bob. It is not entering hostile spaces. It is not winning the comment section, and it's not going viral because none of those things build trust. This is about slow, steady presence in places we already are, places where that trust already exists. All right, so it's important to know as a grassroots messenger that you do not have to be a professional communicator. You don't need perfect wording, but I'm hoping that this will provide you some structure so that when you want to talk about things, this will give you a framework you can use. And this keeps us from falling into facts only mode. Facts are important, but they have a place. So we start here with a shared value, something like we all want, most of us care about. And then we move on to the real world impact. Who is actually affected by this? What actually will change in people's lives? And then ground it in something concrete, a news article, data, or your own lived experience. And then return to why it matters. It matters for freedom. It matters for fairness. It matters for good governance. It matters for responsibility. And so that's a very good framework to follow when you're trying to figure out how to talk about difficult political issues. Hmm. We tend to think, especially as Democrats, that if the facts are strong enough, they will win, but they don't. People are not blank slates. They come to us with a ton of baggage and a ton of perceived notions. Facts do matter, but facts without meaningful um uh, what framework, surroundings, um they just feel like arguments. So when you start with your value, what you find important, then that answers the unspoken question, why are you telling me this? And that immediately lowers people's defenses. Another reason why we get frustrated is that we try to do all four things on this list at the same time. But one message cannot do everything. These are the four things you should be trying to do with every one of your posts or your discussions is to activate the base, re-engage the disengaged, persuade the persuadable, or correct misinformation. If you start with a shared value, then you aren't arguing policy, but you're signaling to everyone who you are and what you think is important, what you care about. Values, when talking to the base, reminds them what we stand for. And it re-engages the disengaged because it tells them there are people out here fighting for you. And it might persuade the persuadable because it reduces resistance instead of being angry and loud when we start with our value. And it makes the facts much more useful when trying to correct misinformation. It doesn't sound like a fact check, it sounds like a person who cares. All right, so let's practice. This is something that Katie Britt put out. She says she is proud to co sponsor the SAVE Act. Securing our elections has been a priority of mine since day one, which is why I also authored the Citizen Ballot Protection Act. Election integrity and ensuring only American citizens are voting in our elections is critical to our democracy and to free and fair elections. We must take every step possible to achieve this. I will continue fighting for election integrity as a proud co sponsor of the SAVE Act and author of the Citizen Ballot Protection Act. I look forward to working with my colleagues to send common sense laws to President Trump's desk. So, this is what I put out on Facebook. Now, you have to remember my audience is very different. So, just keep that in mind. The reason I put this up here was to give us the facts about the SAVE Act. So Katie Britt says she's proud to co-sponsor the SAVE Act to secure our elections. That sounds reasonable. But here's what the SAVE Act actually does. And then I list what the SAVE Act actually does. And then I put in a piece of data. Kansas tried this and it blocked 31,000 eligible citizens from registering. And then I called it voter suppression dressed up as common sense. So there are a couple of things that will not work in with this message that I put out, except for the purpose I put it out for. It calls it voter suppression. I reuse her words a lot. I reuse her secure our elections. I reuse the words common sense. But I do list what's in the bill. And so for the purpose I put this out, I believe this was an effective message. But if you're trying to talk to somebody who doesn't really understand what the SAVE Act is, because they're not seeing it in their feed, because they're just not as um, engaged in politics as we are, then you need something different. So let's start at the beginning. Value, real world impact, concrete, and why it matters. So let's start with a shared value, something we all can agree with. Most of us agree elections should be secure and accessible. So we added to the security, and yet we kept security and we added a value that everybody should agree with. It should be accessible. And then we talk about the real world impact. The SAVE Act would require these things to register or even update your address because you're changing where you're going to be registered. Then you ground it in something concrete. Kansas tried this and it sucked. It blocked more than 30,000 eligible voters. And that says Remember back when I said it needs to be accessible? When eligible citizens are being prevented from registering, that doesn't strengthen elections, it hurts democracy. And that is how I would approach the SAVE Act in a way that is less likely to get resistance because these people were eligible citizens. They could vote in Kansas. And yet, because of these requirements, they were blocked. And that makes this real and personal for people. They can understand that. They can understand that they don't have a passport. They can understand that they don't know where their original birth certificate is. Their original birth certificate may not even be in their name. Now it makes it personal, where this law blocked people from registering to vote. So if you don't remember anything from tonight, because I'm almost done, remember this: value, victim, villain. Be very careful. They're not villains. It's just because it works nice. Value, victim, villain. In this case, the value is we want fair, secure, accessible elections. The victim, eligible voters who are blocked from registering, and the villain, which would be so easy to say who it is, but don't attack people, attack the policy. The villain are the policy changes that would create unnecessary barriers to voting. And with that, I am done and I welcome any questions. Hello,
I can't think of any. Very good presentation. Thank you, Tammy.
Yes.
welcome.
Um, I have a question. How do you feel normal, everyday folks, other than using social, how can we do this when talking to people when they start getting triggered? How can we keep the conversation still pointing, using your steps and keeping the conversation calm?
That's really hard, isn't it?
Yeah.
People get so worked up. You can tell in social media situations that, you say illegal, I'm sorry, non-citizens don't vote in our elections. And that doesn't matter. And they are wrapped right around it. They're convinced it's true. So the only thing I can think to do, because that's a very difficult situation, the only thing I can think to do is to go back to yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'm more concerned about this part of the problem. I'm more concerned about the 30,000 eligible voters in Kansas, one state. There haven't been 30,000 non citizens voting in the last 20 years. I get what you're saying, but I'm more concerned about this part of it. And I don't think that's going to be very helpful because the people you're talking about, you're never going to turn. Does that, you know what I mean? Do you agree?
Yeah, that makes sense.
You know, but the other thing is, I mean, I don't know the setting you're talking about. And it's like I started a Truth Social account. because I am absolutely crazy. Um, and my view of it was I'm not going to convince a soul on here anything. I'm just not. But if I could get one person to stop the scroll, and in your situation, in person, if somebody's there with them, and if you could get that other person to just go, whoa, 30,000 Kansans couldn't register to vote and they were eligible voters. Wow, that's a lot of people. You may not convince that person, but there might be somebody around who's like, I did not know that. And that's, how I started my True Social account was not going to convince anybody, but can I get one person to stop and click on that and have them say, I did not know that. And if I can do that, then I'm moving down the trust aisle with that one person. And that's why this presentation is not we're going to fix everything tomorrow. Something that we can talk about is what time is it? Oh, it's only 7:30. Okay. So Republicans have been doing this for decades. They have built their trust networks for decades, and we're trying to catch up. And I disagree with our views on how we should be catching up. Because I think it's more important that we have the more personal conversations, things that are smaller, more of them, yet smaller. And Republicans have got all the podcasters and all the influencers and all the whatever they've got. But they didn't build that in a day. It took them a long time. But we've got something I think is better because we've got all of us. We've got people who want to talk about things and want to do it in a way that has a chance of moving people. So, any other questions? All right. Well, thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed it and have a good night.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your presentation.